So my relationship or my experience of reading the Gospel of John throughout the years is been marked by moments where I feel like I'm starting to understand parts of it. There are parts of it that still confuse me, mystify me, trouble me, and sometimes just leave me very confused. But there's one part in the Gospel of John that is unique to the Gospel in that there's this special dialogue between Pilate and Jesus during Jesus' trial. It's only in the Gospel of John, this sort of direct exchange that's detailed, and that's something that's really special about the Gospel of John, is that we're given this extra dialogue between Jesus and his disciples, Jesus and folks that don't even show up in the other three. But particularly this conversation between Pilate and Christ fascinates me, because Jesus, during his ministry of 3 years, was being questioned by people all the time. His own followers, the scribes and the Pharisees, Gentiles, and Jesus always had some sort of witty response. He was always on his feet, as it were, giving parables, giving direct answers at times. And yet I've always been fascinated by this moment when he's been arrested and he's before Pilate. And if we're reading this like some sort of Hollywood film, you know, if it was a movie, we would expect some sort of dramatic defense where Jesus would plead for his life and then Pilate would be convinced, and then the movie would maybe have some sort of positive ending to it. But in this moment, when Jesus asked this question, they're going back and forth, as we heard in the reading that Peter read for us. There's this critical moment where we're getting from talking about being an earthly king to this question of what is truth, which to me is always this very kind of Zen question. What is truth? And Jesus gives no response. It's the one time that I can think of in the whole gospel narrative where Jesus doesn't have a response to a question. What is truth? Now, to be fair, not to just take this episode completely out of context, we're told in other places what the truth is. Jesus himself calls himself the truth. In the prologue of the Gospel of John, we're told that the Word is truth and that it dwelt among us in flesh. So by the benefit of having the whole story, we are getting some clues into what is the truth or what is the representation of the truth. But looking at it from Pilate's perspective, Pilate has no idea that he is looking at this representation of the truth. And so he asks, and Jesus gives no response. I've always been fascinated by this story. And Becoming a Swedenborgian and looking at biblical commentary, especially from a Swedenborgian perspective, I feel that even the stories that have confused me or have left me asking more questions, basically being like Pilate, very confused, I found that Swedenborgian scholars since Swedenborg's time have used his methods of correspondence, some symbolism, to break down these narratives into a deeper way, which is why I'm a huge fan of this theology. And the story of Pilate in particular, picked up this really great book by Reverend Bruce called Commentary on St. John. And he unpacks the entire trial in a symbolic narrative. He says that this is a psychological narrative, that the trial, and as we're told, Jesus is taken to Pilate's headquarters. The headquarters are the deeper parts of our mind. So the trial is taking place within the deeper parts of ourselves, and each character in the headquarters is a representation of different parts of ourselves. Pilate represents pure intellect, by the book rationalism. It's different from wisdom or love. It is the rational mind completely in control of the situation, paying attention to laws, edicts, and what we're taught by external people. So it makes sense that Pilate at this point does not have a large dose of love and wisdom. He's operating on pure intellect. So he can't even recognize that who he's talking to is the representation of truth. And he's confronted by wanting to talk more to Jesus, but then he has to deal with the crowd outside. And I'm reminded of Rebecca's sermon. I don't know how many of you were here for that, where she talked about masses, and it was the Passover service, where we get wrapped up in mass movements and group mentality. And the crowd, led by Caiaphas, leads Jesus into the headquarters, brings him to Pilate. So Pilate is stuck between wanting to interrogate this prisoner, trying to understand the truth, but being influenced by group mentality outside. And he goes back and forth twice. He's questioning Jesus, wants to know what is the truth. And Jesus asks him, are you asking me this because you want to ask me or because other people have told you about me? Indicating that the search for truth needs to come from within ourselves. It's not something that's taught from the outside. It's something that needs to start from within. And from the reading that we had, that Tom read to us by faith, by Swedenborg, Swedenborg, this is number 5 in this text, but the 4 sections prior to this talks about the beginning of the search for divine love and wisdom has to come from an inward place. The intellect is really important, of course. We need to be able to analyze things critically. We need to have, part of the pursuit of truth is to have our rational faculties, but it needs to be balanced by love and wisdom, something that Pilate was not experiencing at this time. And I think about a lot of things that are going on that I've been hearing about in the news about certain laws that have been passed in certain states, Mississippi being one of them, and really thinking of the intellectual mentality that some people have. And in thinking about this, I have talked about this in our Divine Love and Wisdom group, that there are certain theologians that I pay attention to that have podcasts, conservative theologians, who are very intellectual people, brilliant people, people who have like 2 PhDs, 3 PhDs, really intelligent people. And when it comes to questions about personal things about other people, things that they may not disagree with, they simply go to the biblical text, quote some verses, and say, well, that's the end of the story. That's a very simple way of doing things. That's a very by the book, literally, by the book, literal reading of things. And interestingly enough, while I was preparing for this sermon, I saw that Swedenborg actually has an episode in the small book called Faith, which you can get a copy at our table out there, where he is talking, he witnesses a conversation between an angel and someone who has faith that is divorced from caring. In other words, someone whose faith is purely based on just going to the text, by the book, and not really thinking about the deeper wisdom or love of their faith. And the angel asks the individual, "Friend, who are you?" The person says, "I'm a Protestant Christian." "What is your theology and what religious practices does it lead to?" "Faith." "What is your faith?" "My faith is that God the Father sent his Son to make complete amends for the human race and that those who believe in this are saved." "What else do you know about salvation?" "Salvation is granted through this faith alone." "What do you know about redemption?" "Redemption was effected through the suffering on the cross. The merit of the Son is credited to us through the faith." And on it goes. And as the conversation goes, the person just keeps saying, when asked, the answer is, "My faith, my faith, my faith, my faith, my faith." That's his only response for most of the questions. And it goes on and on and on until finally the angel says, most of your answers are just my faith. There's nothing else to it. There's no other question, there's no other circumstances going on for your answers. It's just faith. And the angel says that to just go to this one place is if you're just playing one note on a musical instrument without playing any others. There's no harmony. There's no attempt to add to a greater orchestra, to involve more instruments in your band. It's just one note. And I find that when I watch some of these theologians who are highly intellectual, they are like this person that Swedenborg saw in this conversation with his angel. When asked about certain social topics, they just say, well, let me just crack open the Bible, let me read this one verse. It's just this one verse without thinking of things outside the Bible, science, psychology, neuroscience, things that lead us to a deeper understanding of wisdom, which our intellect needs, and which ultimately leads us to love. Because Swedenborg says that when our faith starts from an inward place, it leads us not only to a deeper understanding of our own faith, but eventually to the caring of all other people. That is something that is the core of faith, is that it's derived from love and wisdom from within and leads us to good, harmonious actions with others. And so while I'm troubled by some of the examples that I have seen by very intelligent folks, I feel that they're stuck in this very intellectual place. They're very much like Pilate at this point in time. The thing is that we all experience this. I'm not going to stand up here today and just point fingers at some of our more conservative brethren, but I will say that we all have this moment of cognitive dissonance. Pilate is not prepared to receive the truth. And he is shocked when he is confronted with this very paradoxical individual who says, my kingdom is not of this world. What does that mean? Right? Pilate's expecting him to say, oh, so you're a king. Okay, I can execute you now. Great, right? But he can't. The answers make no sense to him at this time. And so we have a choice when we're met with this type of shock and awe. We can either meditate on it, we can really, as Swedenborg says, turn within and work on ourselves, or, as what happens at the end of the reading, we can release Barabbas. And symbolically, Barabbas is the person is representing when we sidestep the truth, when it's too much for us at this time to really consider the complexity of the situation. We release Barabbas because that's the easier thing to do. Now, one thing that I really appreciate about the character of Pilate is that this isn't the end of the story for Pilate. We find out later in a non-canonical work that there is an epistle written by Pilate to the Emperor Tiberius. Now, whether this is historical or not, doubtful, but whatever. The point is that it is important for us to reflect on theologically, because Pilate writes to Tiberius and says, I think we really messed up by having this guy Jesus crucified and killed. And in fact, this epistle has led to Pilate to be canonized as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty sure that's true. But he's an important figure, nonetheless, amongst certain Christian circles. And even though Pilate does not explicitly say to the Emperor Tiberius, this is the reasons why I totally believe in this guy Jesus, it's obvious that there was a seed that was planted by this brush with truth. Pilate may not have understood at the time, but he was able to come around to it in his own way. And so we all approach faith in our own unique way. It's a struggle. There's so much dynamicism going on within our own psyche, within our own soul. And sometimes we have to be skeptical. We are faced with cognitive dissonance. But Swedenborg says that the step in the right direction is to look within and to really pay attention to how you're treating others. And that's the first step on this journey towards what is truth. Amen. Thank you.